Welcome to Resource Law and Regulation with Peter Scott.
Welcome to Resource Law and Regulation with Peter Scott. Peter is the founder of Scott Law in Bozeman, Montana, where he represents landowners, businesses, utilities, and local governments in matters involving water rights, land use, and natural resource regulation across the region. On this show, we break down how these legal systems actually work in practice. I'm Shamika Rhymes, and in today's episode, we're discussing water right transfers in Montana. Peter will cover how they work, what can go wrong during the process, and why priority dates are so important when ownership or use of a water right changes. Welcome back, Peter.
Hi, Shamika. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. We're talking about water rights. Peter, what does that process look like in Montana when a water right needs to be transferred or changed?
Well, it's not a simple process, Shamika, to understate the reality. It's an administrative process in which a state agency requires an application, and that application goes through a very technical review and results in a preliminary decision or determination. And that preliminary determination, if it's intended to be allowed, is then published for public notice and an opportunity to comment and to object. And so there are many steps to be taken if a water right owner chooses to file a change application. They're in for a process.
What are some of the most common situations where a water right transfer becomes necessary, such as with property sales, development projects, or changes in water use?
Well, often any change in a water right typically triggers a requirement to file an application. And water rights are broken down into multiple elements. There is you've mentioned priority. It's not common that one would seek to change the priority. That's pretty fixed. But there's something called a point of diversion. That's the place where water is taken out of the source. If one needed to move the point of diversion, that would trigger an application requirement. If you wanted to change the place of use, so you acquired a water right that's being used on parcel A, but you also own parcel B and you now want to use that water in that new location, that would trigger a change application requirement. The most common one is seeking to change the purpose of use. And typically that, in these days, that's changing a water right that's being used for irrigation, agricultural purposes, to some form of development-based use, like residential development or even municipal use. Those are common change applications that we see.
Well, like you mentioned about the priority dates, Montana's system seems to place a lot of importance on those. So how can a transfer or change request affect that priority, and why does it matter so much?
Well, one of the sort of foundational principles of Western water law or prior appropriation water law is the seniority of your water right. First in time is first in right are the buzzwords. And so the earliest water right typically has the most value because as the season progresses and the amount of water available in the source goes down, only the senior-most water rights are able to obtain water throughout the course of the season. Junior water rights are curtailed or called out of priority, and they are shut off. So if it's important for you to have water late in the year for the intended purpose, then you need a senior priority water right to accomplish that.
What are some of the most common mistakes that landowners or developers make when they assume that a water right will automatically transfer with a piece of property?
Well, I'd rephrase the question a little, Shamika. The water right does transfer with property unless it's expressly reserved in the deed. The question I think you're getting to is what mistakes do they make in assuming that a water right they've obtained can be used for their intended purpose? And that's usually just a lack of homework. And we do see, I think I told you off air, we see folks moving into Montana who don't understand how this system works and assume, for example, because a ditch or a stream is passing through their property, that they're entitled to use the water. So it's often a matter of education someone throws a pump into a ditch and starts irrigating their lawn with it, so typically someone will eventually come along and say, "Hey, that's not how this works. You need to shut off." And that often results in disputes uh, until people, I think, have really figured out how the system works. And generally speaking, once they're informed, it eliminates the dispute, although I've seen people hang tight.
Wow. Now you're making me think about we had a stream running through our yard when I was growing up, and I'm gonna have to ask my parents about that, about the easements and all those things that go along with it.
Well, it depends where you grew.
I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, and so that is not a prior appropriation state. That system of legal use is referred to as the riparian doctrine. And if your property abuts a stream, then you do have a proportionate right to use the water source. So very different legal system than what we have in Montana.
Oh, thank you. So, well, then I won't bother them and ask them then since it doesn't apply. Well, when someone wants to change how a water right is used, such as moving it to a different location or using it for a different purpose, what legal steps are usually required?
Well, unfortunately, it's not something that's easily doable by the layperson.
Mhm.
It's just not. The system is very complicated. I joke among my colleagues and others that I was a nuclear power plant operator on a fast attack submarine, and we learned to use the 26-factor formula for neutron thermalization, which sounds very complex and was challenging. I can't figure this system out. From a technical standpoint, the work that DNRC does and a number of specialized consultants do to calculate the amount of water that's available, to do the modeling work that's required to show that no one else's use of water will be adversely affected by that change is really a complex process. So it's not something that's lightly undertaken. Uh, that's for sure. And broadly speaking, you go through a pre-application process, which is optional, and you can file an application directly, and then DNRC will evaluate that change. They produce something called a technical report, a deficiency letter. These are steps along the way which allow the applicant to provide additional information or modify or amend the application to satisfy some requirement that they may not have thought of in advance. So there are numerous steps along the way before the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation issues a ruling on your application.
So, what role do they play with we kind of mentioned them reviewing it, but what is their role in approving these changes?
Well, there's a number of decision criteria found in statute, and th- some of them, for example, require the applicant to show that they have a possessory interest or permission of the person with the possessory interest to use the water in the proposed new place of use. That's one example. But the one that's most dominant in the analysis is whether or not the change you're proposing to make will adversely affect any other water users on the source where you're getting your water from. So, for example, if I move the point of diversion upstream 1 mile and I jump upstream from 2 or 3 other water users' diversion, then I will affect the amount of water that's available in that stream when it gets to their diversion. And DNRC will take a very close look to determine whether my proposal could adversely affect. And the burden is on me as the applicant to show DNRC that it will not adversely affect those other water users. And that can be challenging.
Well, can you walk us through an example of a situation where a water right transfer or change became really complicated and what factors made the process more difficult than you expected?
Well, I have to say that very few of the water right change applications that I've been involved with in, the last 10 years, and actually going back further when our family was still living in Eastern Washington, and a number of change applications there, very few of them are what I would consider simple. There's always a multitude of details. And, thinking of specific examples, I had one client who had purchased a water right and they'd done all the conveyance work. They received the ownership of it without understanding the process. So they really did believe that they were going to just buy the water right and they could start using it at a different location for a different purpose. And so once they found out what the requirements were for changing it, they found themselves in a difficult position because financially they had invested heavily on the expectation of using that water and got themselves in a situation where they were unable to do so. And that's not uncommon. The administrative process can be lengthy, extending years in some cases. And it's very hard for developers to calculate project costs and development schedules years in advance without the certainty that the water they need will be available when they're ready for it. Those are the common problems. So you really need to get a lot of lead time if you're proposing a project in an area where water rights are difficult to come by.
Well, how do neighboring water users factor into these decisions? And what happens if someone believes a transfer could affect their own water rights?
Well, I alluded to this a moment ago, Shamika. The statutes governing change applications require the applicant to provide notice to water users on the source, and the department will approve the list of water users that are going to receive notice. So you will then have to deliver that notice to them. And there's also publication requirements. So the public at large and other water users in the area will also receive legal notice of the change application. And once DNRC has made a preliminary determination, if that preliminary determination is to grant the application, then they will be given an opportunity to comment and to object. And if they choose to, carry that all the way forward to the courtroom for judicial review.
Okay. Well, for landowners or businesses that are evaluating their water rights as part of a property purchase or project, what are some of the key issues that they should understand before relying on that water access? And I think we touched on a few things as we've been chatting.
Yeah, it's important to, and we've formulated a checklist. I won't put it up on the screen or go through it now, but step one is the water you believe you're acquiring currently in use? And has it been in use for the last 10 years? Montana has a 10-year statutory presumption of abandonment. So stated differently, if the water hasn't been used for a period of 10 years, then it is presumed to be abandoned. And you may be buying a piece of paper that does not have a legal right associated with it. Other things that check are when the priority date of it is. Will it be available when you need it? What's the volume that's allowed to be used? If you're planning to irrigate 100 acres, but you're only acquiring 5 acre-feet of water, you're not going to be irrigating 100 acres with that volume of water. So matching the water right, making sure it's valid, and matching it to the proposed use are the steps I recommend.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has been such an informative conversation. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Well, that's it for today's episode of Resource Law and Regulation with Peter Scott. If you'd like to learn more about Peter Scott and his work helping clients navigate water rights, land use, and natural resource law in Montana, you can visit scott-law.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone who might need it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.